Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mental Health and Neuroscience Information Session and Masterclass webinar. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are in the world. My name's Dan Hermans, and I'm the Program Coordinator of the Mental Health and Neuroscience programs and Professor of Youth Mental Health and Neurobiology at UniSC's Thompson Institute. And it's my pleasure to host this webinar today. And the presenters you will be hearing from soon are Dr. Chrissy Driver and Dr. Bonnie Quigley, who are both course coordinators for the Mental Health and Neuroscience postgraduate programs. Chrissy's going to give you an overview, an information session, and then you're going to hear a wonderful masterclass from Bonnie Quigley. Just some housekeeping. First thing to say is that this webinar is being recorded. Also, it's a very popular session. We have around 900 registrations, so thank you all. And given that, we might not get through all the questions, but I do urge you or encourage you to post questions in the Q&A function, and we can address these questions towards the end, particularly questions about eligibility and other issues about the program, but also questions, of course, to Bonnie around the masterclass. Next slide, please. So on behalf of my colleagues at the University of Sunshine Coast and the Thompson Institute, I would like to acknowledge country. I pay my respects to the elders, the traditional custodians, that is, and the elders past, present, and emerging on the lands that we all gather on today. Next slide, please. So just by a way of overview, I'm going to give a brief introduction to the Thompson Institute for you all. And then we're going to hear, as I said before, from Chrissy Driver, course coordinator, about the mental health and neuroscience programs. Chrissy's going to give you an overview of the programs themselves and talk to you also about admissions requirements, how to apply, and we're also going to hear a student story. And then after that, you're going to hear a masterclass session from Bonnie Quigley. Bonnie's going to talk about PTSD and biomarkers, and you're going to hear about research and some of the latest research that utilizes biological markers to help us better understand and treat people with PTSD. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview of the Thompson Institute based on the Sunshine Coast. We've been in operation since 2016. Uh, we address some Australia's and I think the world's most pressing mental health issues. And we have this approach where we undertake clinical advocacy, research, and education. Obviously, you're here tonight to hear about our education or an aspect of our education. But in terms of clinical, we have a whole range of clinical or clinics, I should say, in psychology and psychiatry, healthy brain aging, and novel treatments as well, such as brain stimulation and clinical trials. Advocacy, we're very keen in this regard. We have many public events, community and industry training. We have lived experience research program, and we're very inclusive in all of our work in this regard. In research, we cover some of the major themes, as I mentioned before, in mental health, from youth mental health to trauma and stress-related conditions, suicide prevention, and healthy brain aging and dementia. And we have imaging, data analytics, and molecular biology, which you'll hear a lot more about today in terms of our platforms that are run across our research programs. And obviously, education, the postgraduate programs, the mental health and neuroscience is why you're here, I guess, and we're going to hear more about it today. But we also do, of course, have high degree research programs and other levels of training. Next slide, please. And very recently, well, actually, it's perhaps not that recent, but just over a year ago, we launched the National PTSD Research Centre. And with this, we have a new director, Professor Alain Brunet, who's leading the Thompson Institute National PTSD Research Centre. Alain is a world-renowned expert, a clinical psychologist, but expert in PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And as you can see in this image here in this slide, This centre is very much dedicated to research around trauma survivors, PTSD, and this is a first of its kind in regards to having neuroscience, psychotherapy, and a whole range of other techniques and approaches in research addressing PTSD and stress-related disorders, all under the one roof at the Thompson Institute. Next slide, please. Oh, that's maybe go back one step, and that's my cue to introduce the next speaker, the first speaker, really, the presenter, Chrissy Driver, course coordinator, and over to you, Chrissy.
Thanks, Dan, and welcome everybody. So yes, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the mental health and neuroscience courses, and I promise to be quick as I know you're all super keen to hear from Bonnie later. So we have 3 programs across our mental health and neuroscience suite. As you can see, we have the graduate certificate, which is 4 courses, a graduate diploma, which is 8, and then the master's, which is a little different. If you're interested in any of these courses, you might be wondering which one might be best suited to you. So in a little bit, I'll explain the differences and what our students have actually been doing with their qualifications, which is something we get asked a lot. But firstly, I'll just briefly explain a little bit more about them. So our mental health and neuroscience postgraduate programs are fully online, so you can study from home or wherever you like, really. You will gain a comprehensive understanding of the rapidly evolving field of mental health and neuroscience. You'll deepen your mental health expertise and learn how to apply this knowledge in your own professional context. So our courses focus on the latest research in mental health and neuroscience, including things like novel treatments across a range of mental and substance use disorders. And so our courses are really focusing on society's most pressing mental health issues and provide insights into the neurobiology underpinning these conditions, and then emerging technologies and methods to predict, diagnose, and treat these conditions. So in these programs, you'll get to study via UniSC's Thompson Institute that you've just heard about from Dan, therefore benefiting from our integration of world-class research, clinical services, education, and advocacy. So I'm going to explain more about the online format soon, but first I'm going to play you a quick video from one of our recent MHN graduates about her experience from the program. So next slide, please, Bonnie, and play the video.
My name is Marissa Price, and I'm a secondary school teacher at an all-boys college where I teach psychology, legal studies, and English. Working in secondary education, I can see daily how crucial neuroscience is for understanding behaviour, cognition, and emotional well-being. The grad dip offered me the chance to build foundational knowledge, and it quickly began transforming how I engaged in my teaching role. The units on youth mental health and biology, stress-related disorders, and understanding and preventing suicide were not only fascinating, but also gave me practical strategies for supporting struggling teenagers. What I've enjoyed most about the MHM program is how interdisciplinary and applied it is. It's not just theoretical, it's learning that's relevant and transformative. I particularly appreciated how the content helped me connect contemporary scientific research with human experience in meaningful ways.
So as you've heard from Marissa, she's a high school teacher. And for those of you who may have been to some of our previous webinars, you know that we also have a huge range of students. That is that they come from a variety of professional backgrounds. As you can see on the screen, I've listed a few there. So we have students from a huge range of professions. And I guess this diversity of our student backgrounds really reflects how increasingly relevant mental health is across a range of careers. And so due to the online nature of this course, we also have students from all over Australia, which is awesome, and some who were even living overseas when they studied. One of our current students, Beck, who's a PR manager, she told us it's really inspiring to see people from different walks of life coming together to learn how they can better contribute to the world and our communities. Next slide. So I'm going to give you an overview of the 3 programs and what they offer, all of which, as I've said, are completely online and asynchronous. So in the grad cert, we introduce you to the main disorders across the lifespan and the neuroscience behind them, ranging from trauma, neurodiversity, mood disorders, eating disorders, substance use, PTSD, and all the way through to dementia. And then we critique current and novel treatment approaches. Next, we delve into youth mental health and the neurobiological underpinnings. So we unpack, again, some of the most pressing issues for young people, such as cyberbullying, suicidality, and social connectedness, and then how the brain is affected by these experiences. Then we introduce you to how neuroimaging techniques, such as MRI and EEG, have enhanced our understanding of mental health diagnosis and treatment, and explore some emerging brain-based biomarkers, and you'll hear about some biomarkers later from Bonnie. Finally, as suicide is a major public health concern, this course focuses on prevention at all levels of society, lived experience, and deepening our understanding of the unique factors for certain priority populations. Now, the grad cert is available part-time and is a good place to start if you're just wanting to test the mental health and neuroscience waters, or you want a shorter qualification that still gives you the fundamentals. So here's what some of our students who have completed our graduate certificate have said about the course. Next slide. So this is from Ian. He said, the grad cert has been of enormous benefit. I've applied relevant aspects positively in advocating for better inclusion and neurodiversity in the workplace, prevention of psychological harm, and intervention with FIFO workers who are struggling with their mental health. He said he had such a positive yet challenging study experience in completing the grad cert, and he has no hesitation in recommending a mental health program to anyone who has a passion for learning in this field. He said you will not be disappointed and it will change your thinking and enhance your knowledge forever. Next slide. So in terms of eligibility for this graduate certificate program, what you will need is either a bachelor's degree in any discipline, or completed a recognised AQF diploma level qualification, and have 3 years full-time relevant work experience in a mental health setting. Next slide. So the grad dip is 8 courses, which includes the 4 grad cert courses that I've just spoken about, and 4 additional courses where we take a deeper dive into more specific areas of mental health and neuroscience. So as you can see, we have healthy brain aging, where we give you a deeper understanding of the neuroscience underlying the spectrum from healthy brain aging to mild cognitive impairment and right through to the risk factors and neurobiology, current and emerging treatment approaches to disease-based, this is a tongue twister, disease-based brain aging, such as dementia. So in our neurocognition course, we focus on how specific cognitive domains are affected across different disorders. And again, we learn the neurobiological mechanisms behind current and emerging treatment approaches for neurocognitive impairments. Our stress-related disorders course unpacks the neurobiology of stress and trauma and investigates the evidence for current and novel treatment options for debilitating disorders such as PTSD. Again, you'll hear more about this from Bonnie later. Finally, we have a whole course devoted to how lifestyle factors are changing the landscape in terms of prevention and treatment in mental health. As always, we delve into the neurobiological mechanisms of the different lifestyle factors and the benefits of multi-domain approaches. So as you can see, the grad dip takes you to the next level in terms of knowledge relating to specific issues and topics in mental health and neuroscience, and gives you plenty of opportunity to apply the knowledge into your current professions. So what do our students say about the grad dip? Next slide. So Katie completed this course as a means of bridging her undergraduate studies in psychology to a Master's of Occupational Therapy, and now she's actually completing a PhD in dementia research. She said that learning alongside students from varied backgrounds fostered discussion and critical thinking that furthered her understanding of the multidisciplinary applications of this research. She said the coursework encouraged the students to research topics relevant to their disciplines and interests, whilst challenging them to widen their scope of what neuroscience encompasses. She said that this course permanently changed how she views mental health and believes that the insights gained will continue to influence her practice for many years. Then we have Cassia, who is a psych grad and behaviour specialist, and she let us know that within a month of completing the grad dip, she was offered a new position as a child and family wellbeing practitioner, where she provides holistic services to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and families. She said her MHN studies have greatly enhanced her understanding of mental health issues and effective intervention strategies, and the skills that she acquired during the program have been invaluable in refining her therapeutic approaches and improving her quality of care. Next slide. So this is a little bit about what our students are doing with their qualifications. So for many of our students, the graduate diploma is about becoming more specialised in their current practice or profession and having that more in-depth mental health and neuroscience knowledge that provides a better understanding of their clients' needs. On the other hand, some students are following their passions, changing their careers, or going on a personal learning journey. We've also had several students complete the graduate diploma as a stepping stone to medicine. Others are using their graduate diploma to enhance their CVs and resumes, to apply for more senior positions, advance in their current career prospects, or moving into more mental health and wellbeing based roles within their current organisation. So with so many organisations now valuing health and wellbeing, having employees with this knowledge is preparing organisations for the future in terms of the diverse skills in the workforce. Next slide. So in terms of eligibility for the graduate diploma, candidates do need an undergraduate degree in a relevant discipline. Now, examples of relevant disciplines include, but are not limited to, science, medical science, nursing, medicine, psychology, health science, pharmacy, counselling, occupational therapy, paramedicine, speech pathology, social work, education, etc. As I said, that list is not exhaustive. If you don't have a relevant undergrad at this point, then the graduate certificate might be a good place to start with those slightly different eligibility criteria. Okay, next slide. So now to the Masters. So this has all the graduate diploma courses but finishes with a research project. So students complete a research principles course about the variety of research areas in mental health and neuroscience. And then they do a supervised component which involves a comprehensive view of the literature on a given topic and an empirical thesis component representing an original contribution to the literature. So our students do undertake data analysis, but these are based on existing data sets predominantly that we have at the TI, which may be part of a larger program of research and may therefore build on previous work carried out to date. So if you know that research is what you want to do and you meet the eligibility criteria, then you can apply directly into the Masters. On the other hand, if you really like the look of the mental health and neuroscience content knowledge without the research part, then at this point, the grad dip or the grad cert would be a better start. At the end of the day, if you're not sure, you can always start in the other programs, the grad cert or the grad dip, and maybe apply for the Masters later. The point is these courses are nested, so you can start with one and build onto the next. But with the Masters, to ensure availability of high quality research projects, at this point in time, places are very limited, and this quota will vary each semester. Semester 2 applications for the Master have closed, but you can still apply for the graduate diploma or the graduate certificate now to get you started in semester 2. Next slide, please. So eligibility for the Masters is similar to the graduate diploma, but we do also ask for a personal statement telling us about your motivation to choose this Masters particularly, and how your previous studies and experience align with the degree and then the research avenues that we propose. Next slide. So we're just going to hear a little bit more from Marissa, who completed the graduate diploma and then went on to complete the Masters.
In mid-2024, UniSC launched the Masters program, just in time for me to scrap my planned semester off and dive deeper into adolescence and cognition. And honestly, understanding how adolescent brains work is pretty invaluable when you're deciding how to teach them. The Lifestyle and Mental Health unit, for example, really challenged me to think differently about how I support my students, especially when it comes to sleep, diet, and emotional regulation. The knowledge I've gained has had a direct impact on my work. I'm more confident interpreting research, explaining complex mental health concepts to both colleagues and students, and in teaching my own psychology classes more effectively. Statistics has never been my strong suit, but thanks to the patience of the MHN staff, I now provide far richer learning experiences for my own students. I feel equipped to lead interdisciplinary projects grounded in neuroscience and mental health through projects that produce measurable outcomes, not just anecdotal insights.
Thanks. Next slide. So we do know that postgraduate study is expensive. So I do have some great news for those of you who are keen on the graduate certificate or graduate diploma and actually want to apply now. So these courses are currently offered with Commonwealth supported places, which means that they are offered at a significantly reduced price, as you can see on the screen. The Masters is not currently under the scheme and is therefore full price. So this is also something else to consider when you decide which one you're going to apply for. But as I said, the graduate diploma, graduate certificate, applications are still open and are Commonwealth supported places. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to cover some of the common questions quickly that we get from prospective students and let you know some advice that our current and previous students have given us. So people always ask us, how much time do I need to study each week? Now, we do sit within the UniSC's usual semester and actually soon to be trimester days. So we offer about 12 weeks worth of content, but being fully online, you can choose when you do your study and how you approach the content. If you like structure, you can follow along week by week, guided by the course coordinator. But if you're more autonomous, there's no obligation to engage weekly. The entire course materials are available at the start of the semester, so you can strategize how you want to complete the assessment straight away. So whilst you can do this in your own time, the only thing you must do is to submit the assessments before the due dates, and these are spread throughout the semester. The university does recommend about 10 hours per week per course as a rough guide for study time. And from our perspective, our modules are designed to take a couple of hours to complete. And then if you engage in the optional post-module activities, then this will take longer. Any additional time on top of this is self-study, extra reading and working on your assessments. So most of our students work part-time or full-time, so many have actually chosen to study part-time. The feedback is that this is a better way to pace the learning and allows you to focus on the content in more depth. But we do also have students who do manage the full-time load, so it's up to you to decide how much time you can realistically allocate to study. So advice from Lisa and River, who both did the graduate certificate part-time. Both Lisa and Riven worked full-time, so studied part-time, and recommended using planners and compartmentalizing work and study by blocking out time each week specifically to focus on study and kind of stick to that routine. Next slide. So what is online study like? Now, online study is different. So if you haven't done it before, it may take a while to adjust. There are no lectures or tutorials to attend. There's no 2-hour recording or, regular compulsory tutorials. So there is more of an onus on the student to be proactive and manage your time. So our content, which is what normally would be delivered, say, in your 2-hour traditional lecture, is packaged up in a beautiful interactive module. Now, you'll get an example of what that module looks like after this webinar when we send you the taster module. So being online, you can structure this in a way that suits your work and life commitments, and the modules can actually be viewed on your smartphone as well. There's lots of opportunity for discussion with your peers, questions about the content via discussion boards, and we do have optional Zoom drop-in sessions regularly and optional extra activities that are designed to consolidate your learning and help you prepare for assessments. So those types of activities are what you would normally do in perhaps an in-class tutorial or workshop. But in the online setting, a lot of this is optional and you can choose what extras you want to engage in. The only necessary component is the assessments you have to complete. So feedback from Riven was the course was really informative, engaging and empowering, and you could be as autonomous or collaborative as you wanted to be. The online format was easy to navigate and everything had been thought of. In the rare case that there was an issue, staff were very receptive and responsive to make improvements. Okay, next slide. Next, we always get asked, how much neuroscience is there in the course? The answer is lots. I'm sure you know that's why you're all here. Neuroscience is a rapidly growing field and is becoming somewhat popular thanks to some high-profile podcasters. So it's a very exciting time to be learning about the brain. Now, we don't expect students to come away knowing everything about the brain, but we do delve into the neurobiology, imaging modalities, and more. Now, whilst there are some courses that are a bit more neuro-focused and some with a little less content, it is definitely a blend of both mental health and neuroscience. But that's what makes this course one of a kind in Australia. These courses are not mental health with a sprinkling of neuroscience. They are very much a balanced blend. Now, most students do find it tricky to begin with, as neuroscience is like a whole new language, but it does become more manageable as you progress through the courses, and you will notice themes popping up across the courses. It's important to note, though, that with the wonderful world of the internet, we have lots of mental health and neuroscience content at your fingertips, and doing a quick Google search can give you a fairly good overview of some of the recent trends and topics. However, in these programs, we do challenge you to go deeper than that. Through our assessments, we encourage the skills of science communication, but also, to quote Professor Dan, be a healthy skeptic. That is, get deep into the literature, consider all sides of the evidence, and evaluate the findings in the context of your own professional or personal context. So we do have several different assessment styles to challenge these skills, to test your knowledge, and to allow you the opportunity to demonstrate your science communication across many contexts and for varied audiences. So some more feedback from Katie and Beck and Riven. So the teaching staff do a great job of breaking down incredibly complex topics so that they were easy to understand. The information our cohort is studying is really current, and developing an understanding of the different cutting-edge brain imaging techniques has been fascinating, and I was amazed to discover the course covers such a broad range of topics. Next slide. Finally, it's important to point out that our online students do get access to all the same support services as on-campus students. So you get academic support, student wellbeing, accessibility services, and more. Plus, you get support from your course coordinators in a variety of ways, including discussion boards, Zoom drop-ins, and regular check-ins with study tips and hints throughout the semester. Our students wanted to share the following with you. So I was offered high levels of support, access to supplementary resources to solidify my understanding of any complex content, and throughout the many Zoom drop-in sessions which were offered to discuss content and assignments. Again, the Zoom meetings were a great mechanism to check in with the course coordinator and ask questions and see other students and understand different points of view on assignment topics. So it really is also an opportunity to get that social connection with your fellow students as well. Okay, next slide. So we'll just get a quick wrap up from Marissa before I quickly tell you how you can apply, and then I promise to pass you over to Dr. Bonnie Quigley. So play video, please.
The online format has been a major strength of the MHM program. As someone balancing full-time work, study, and parenting, being able to learn on my own schedule has made a huge difference. Support from coordinators, forums, the library, and peer discussions are always accessible and encouraging. The materials were well structured and engaging, which kept me motivated and connected, even in a remote learning environment. If you're considering any of the MHN courses, my advice is simple: do it. Be ready to be stretched, to grow, and to discover new ways of thinking. It's an investment not just in your knowledge, but in your capacity to make a meaningful difference in your field, your community, and in your own understanding of the human brain and mind. It's a fascinating subject that never gets old.
Thanks. Next slide. I love that wrap up from Marissa. Anyway, so how do you apply? Well, semester 2 applications, as I said, for the graduate certificate and graduate diploma are still open. You've got plenty of time to apply for those Commonwealth supported places. So you can apply directly through the USC website. Make sure you do check the eligibility criteria and include all the necessary information in your application to make the process easier. If you're not sure if your qualifications and experience are appropriate, you can always speak to Student Services for some advice. Thanks for listening. I know you're excited. I'll now pass over to Bonnie, who's going to take you through an amazing masterclass about biomarkers for PTSD. Thanks, Bonnie.
All right, thanks, Chrissy. So hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Bonnie Quigley, and sometimes I feel like I'm a little bit of an outlier in our mental health and neuroscience because I'm a molecular biologist by trade. So while Professor Dan and Dr. Chrissy are quite classic neuroscientists and can tell you lots about the brain, I'm going to be here today to tell you about some of my work with PTSD and the rest of our body. Because as I'd like to say that our brain and our mind are in our body and they all go together. So for me, I'm a lecturer in trauma and translational research at the Thompson Institute and the University of the Sunshine Coast. I'm also the molecular biology program leader at our National PTSD Research Centre. So I'm really excited to tell you a little bit more about PTSD and then some of the biomarker work that we have going on. So to start off with, we do want to kind of let everyone know that we will be discussing the effects of trauma. So first and foremost, please take care of yourself out there. If we get talking about some topics today and you're feeling upset or unwell, please put yourself first and be kind to yourself. This webinar is recorded, so you can always come back to it later. And if you feel some of these topics bring up things inside you that you need to talk about and share, please talk to your family or friends, reach out to your doctor, see kind of, if you have an employee assistance program, lots of those are geared to help. As well as formal programs like Lifeline and Beyond Blue are out there. So please know that you're not alone, and please do take care of yourself tonight and every day going forward. Because today I'm going to be talking about a lot of the impacts of stress. And so one of the first things we typically think of is PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. So that's a trauma and stressor related disorder, and it's a condition that develops after witnessing or experiencing a traumatic event. Now, there's lots and lots of events that classify as traumatic events. So I've just put a few pictures and a few examples up here on this slide, and they can include serious accidents, physical or sexual assault, war, and kind of genocide, and those really horrific situations that seem to be more and more common in our world today, as well as natural disasters that lots of Australians are dealing with, whether they're fire, floods, extreme weather events. And so you can see that there's no shortage of trauma that we all can be exposed to. And current studies are saying about 70% of us will experience a trauma that can classify as a triggering event for PTSD in our lifetime. So when we think about these traumas and about PTSD, there's 4 major symptom clusters that kind of need to be kind of met to meet this particular condition. Now, for PTSD, there's actually over 600,000 ways we can all experience PTSD, because there's a whole range of symptoms that fit under this disorder. But when we break it down, there's 4 major classes, 4 major kind of groups that you have to have some conditions from and some symptoms from. And that includes re-experiencing of the trauma. So that's where you get your classic flashbacks, your nightmares, your intrusive memories of different kinds. So that's one group. Then you have avoidance. So that's, that desire to avoid memories of the event, avoid thoughts, avoid people and places that can remind you of that traumatic event. So having that avoidance characteristic. To have negative cognitions and mood. So these are really negative things, beliefs like I'm a bad person or I'm unsafe, that kind of fear, shame, guilt. And then that withdrawal, that detachment, and that inability to feel positive things, that kind of really negative effect of having experienced a trauma. And then the last group is the arousal symptoms, or the things that have kind of emerged. And that can be your angry outburst, being irritable, doing things risky, being on hypervigilance. And then your sleep problems, not being able to settle down and sleep and having problems concentrating. That fits under this last category of symptoms. So if you find that you have some of the symptoms in all 4 categories and you've experienced these for over a month, that can be very characteristic of PTSD. One thing that we don't talk about a whole lot, but that deserves a moment of mention, is the acute stress disorder, or so what happens right after a trauma, because it sounds very similar to PTSD, and lots of people will experience this as well. And that's the same sort of idea, witnessing, experiencing, having that experience of a traumatic event, but kind of right after the event, that 3 days to 1 month, having that whole jumble of symptoms and feelings. And so that can be a common disorder as well. And that can be a natural reaction to trauma. And with this disorder, it can clear up on its own. So again, like I said, when something traumatic happens, please be kind to yourself and give yourself some time, because it's not PTSD right away. Some conditions and for some people, these feelings resolve on their own. On the other extreme, we have complex PTSD. And this is when an individual has experienced repeated trauma. And so just one example of that is kind of survivors of child abuse or domestic violence. But again, I'm sure we could spend all evening listing all the different experiences that have the repeated trauma that could lead to complex PTSD. But so when it comes to complex PTSD, just think of PTSD on a bigger scale. This is more difficulty with all of those emotions being out of balance. It's larger outbursts. It's everything just kind of more, because there's been more trauma. And this can often get misdiagnosed as a personality disorder, such as borderline personality disorder. And that's because there's more effects to the emotions, things are bigger, there can be changes in your personality because you're dealing with a lot. And then it also gets into lots of the physical symptoms and the physical effects. So that's another consideration when PTSD becomes complex, and it does tend to have a higher suicidality component to it. So this is kind of another kind of condition, another version of how we can be experiencing these traumas. So if talking about these different conditions has got you wondering, and you're sitting going, oh, well, gee, maybe I'm feeling some of these. Is it enough to be PTSD? Has it been long enough? Is it the right mixture? Well, at the Thompson Institute and our PTSD Research Centre, we've developed a test. And so this screener is online. You can get to it by the QR code here, or if you Google our PTSD test at the Thompson Institute, it'll take you to this page. And if you click on the blue button, you can go through and answer a series of questions. And it'll help guide you through to see where your symptoms fit on that kind of acute stress to PTSD to complex PTSD spectrum. And it can start giving you an idea of whether you need to be going to get some more help and get some more support. So this is kind of a start, and it also has some great resources to moving on to supports that can be available. So from that, also with our center, we have a range of studies that we currently have on the go, our clinical trials. And so at the moment, we have 2 new PTSD treatments that we have in clinical trial. One's our reconsolidation therapy, and one's a trauma treatment study. And so again, if you feel like you have some of these symptoms, if you've tried treatments and they haven't been of success for you, this could be another option for you. So feel free to follow through either with these QR codes or by going to our website. And maybe there's new treatment options that we can help you with and that you can try. Because overall, I mean, for the number of us that are online right now, we definitely have people living with PTSD in our group today. That in the general Australian audience, depending on which statistics you like to use, about 6% of us are living with PTSD at any given time. And this rate can be double for women, because we found that the combination of the biology of being women and also the types of trauma that women are often exposed to go together to actually give us a higher risk than men of developing PTSD after a traumatic event. And so then on top of that, there are particular professions that we know that are exposed to trauma on a regular basis as part of their work. A lot of our military personnel, so our veterans, PTSD rates are estimated to be as high as 1 in 6 veterans. As well as of all of our first responders and frontline workers. And so here I've got one statistic from paramedics that estimate about 1 in 5 can be living with PTSD. And if we looked up we could find similar statistics for our police officers and our firefighters and our other first responders. So in professions that actually have a high trauma burden, it's very challenging. There's a lot of impact of dealing with those traumatic events. So even though a lot of us will experience a trauma, we won't all develop PTSD. So well, why? And it's a whole mix of factors. There's factors that we have before the trauma, there's factors during the trauma and after the trauma. And there's a lot of things on this list you're going to see that are really outside of our control. That kind of our predisposing factors, our risk factors include things like being female, having a low IQ, having previous trauma exposure or other mental health challenges, or personality factors, whether you're naturally an optimist or a pessimist, as well as genetic risks that are completely outside our control. And then we move on to actually the trauma itself, and whether we were concerned for our life, whether we feared that we were going to die, can have a really big impact. How physically assaultive the trauma has been, how severe, whether we were injured in it, that the factors of the trauma itself can impact, as well as after the trauma, things like what kind of support we have, whether financial stress, whether we ended up in pain or in the hospital, whether we ended up developing that acute stress disorder and how that resolved, whether we're left with some sort of a disability that's impacted our life. Together, all of these things play a role into whether how we process that trauma develops into PTSD. So this will be my one kind of neuroscience, neurocognitive picture. As I said, I'm the biologist with our neuroscientists, because we know that physically your brain has physical changes that reflect the condition of PTSD. So here in your mind, having a look, your amygdala, which is kind of down kind of in the middle of the base, that's responsible for processing our emotions, particularly fear and how we feel fear. That when we've developed PTSD, that part of our brain is too active and we have too much activity. And so that's where that kind of persistent fear and hypervigilance can come from. Alternatively, our hippocampus, which is responsible for our memories, and our prefrontal cortex up at the front, that's responsible for our decision making and our rational thought. Those regions have too little activity. We see less activity, we see less functioning in those regions. And that makes sense, and that our memories are dysregulated, that we're not processing our memories the same way. We're not making kind of our decision making, rational thinking, that's actually physically disrupted in our brains when we've developed PTSD. And then finally, we've got our hypothalamus, and that kind of begins our HPA axis that then's creating our stress hormones, our cortisol, that then comes out of our brain and into our body, and then regulates our stress response throughout our body. And so that gets out of balance. So for me, then that comes into our body, and that's really where I'm really interested in, because then there's lots of physical symptoms of PTSD. And so on this particular picture, I've crossed out the of the unexpected, because when our stress hormones are out of balance and our body's out of balance, then these aren't unexpected symptoms. And so as the biologist, I'm the one that's saying, if there's something going on in your head, there's something going on in your body, and I really want to understand that. So for me, one way that I look at that is I look for biomarkers. So biomarkers are just any biological molecule that we can measure that tells us something about a condition. And we can look for them in mental health because they make nice objective markers. Lots of our mental health questionnaires, lots of the measures that we use can be quite subjective from person to person. Whereas if we can take a biological sample, if we can take some blood and do a measurement, it gives us a really objective measure that can really help us determine what treatment's most appropriate, and how your treatment is going. And so for PTSD, there's been a range of biomarkers considered, and they've been immune markers like our cytokines involved in our immune response. We're going to talk about a neurotrophin today, again, our neuroanatomy, those brain characteristics and hormones. So there's been lots that have been considered, but none are universally recognized, because we haven't found that one key that can explain all of PTSD. And my money's on that we might not be able to, because it is quite a diverse condition. So what I'm going to finish, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. And I think it has the potential to be a really good biomarker if we can understand. So it's the most prevalent growth factor in our central nervous system, which includes our brain, but it's also found throughout our body. And it's really essential for learning and memory. And so I said it's through neuronal plasticity. So it helps our neurons make connections and change connections. So it's been considered for a lot of different psychiatric conditions because of that connection to be able to help our brain. So it's great. I can measure it from blood. So you can see my little picture, our serum and plasma that we can collect. And then here on the screen, you can see we have our picture of our protein. And a note that there's actually two different types of the protein, a mature form and a pro form, that actually do opposite things, because sometimes we need to turn on connections or turn off connections to learn. And so understanding the difference, I think, will help us understand this biomarker. So I'm going to tell you about two studies that we've done at the Thompson Institute. I'm trying to figure out if this is a good biomarker to work. So our first study, we looked at adults over 50. And so we had 24 that have PTSD and 24 that didn't. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at the DNA sequence of this gene, and I wanted to look at the total levels, so both that mature and pro together in our blood, to see if it could tell the difference and tell me who had PTSD and who didn't. So looking at it from the DNA point of view, we actually found that there's actually one difference. One single amino acid can actually have a lot of predictive power. That there's one spot, position 66 in the protein, where if you have a valine or a methionine, and both are very common. And so some of us have vals and some of us have mets. But we found that when you have the MET amino acid in your protein, the protein's not processed as well, so it breaks down a little faster. So people tend to have a little less of the protein. And we actually found by having that MET version in our DNA, it's actually a risk factor for developing PTSD. So if you look at the pie charts, you can see that my non-PTSD population, the group that didn't develop PTSD, had mostly Val. And I said, you get up with two, because remember, you get one set of your genetics from your mom and one set from your dad. So again, we talk about factors that you have no control over. This is what you inherited from your parents. So most were Val and some Val MET. Whereas on my group that had PTSD had a lot more of that MET, the Val MET and the MET. But as again, you see, it's not black and white. It's just one risk factor. Some of my people with that didn't have PTSD still had a MET allele, and some that had two Vals still got PTSD. So your genetics aren't the be all end all by itself. Whereas then when I looked at the protein that was circulating in the serum, I found that the group that had PTSD on average had more total BDNF. And so that made me think, well, now are we overcompensating? Our genetics are saying if you have less, you're more likely to have risk factor of developing PTSD, but then does our body make too much trying to overcompensate? So that gets me thinking that this might be a Goldilocks protein. You don't want too little and you don't want too much. It has to be just right. And so what we can see here is that when you actually look at this graph, this is a picture, and all of those little colored circles are individuals. And so you see it's a spread and that there's a lot of variation. So I can't just measure this protein and say, okay, you've got too much because it's 100 and you don't have not enough because you have 10. That everyone's just right is different. So that means that I've got a lot more work trying to figure out how do I tell, what's the little piece of information that tells me if your number is too high for you. So stay tuned, still working on it. So the next study I want to tell you about is one about symptom severity. So if we took a group that already had PTSD, and this was a group that was a little bit younger, and it was a bigger group and had a range of trauma. So we had some military veterans, we had some childhood trauma, and we had a mix of others. So there were car accidents and various assaults. And we wanted to see that how did their mature BDNF, that BDNF that turns everything on, how did that compare to their symptoms measured by the doctor, by the psychiatrist, and measured for themselves? So this is the plot that looks like when the psychiatrist assessed their symptoms. So as you go through, every one of those colored shapes is an individual. And we found as the psychiatrist said their symptoms got worse, so their CAP score got higher, their mature BDNF level came down. So more mature BDNF means less symptoms. And it was quite significantly correlated. So that's really exciting. That's what we need a biomarker to be. The biomarker matches the condition we're trying to look at. So I got really excited about this. And then we compared it to the self-assessment, the individuals, how they marked it themselves. And there's still a correlation. It still matches that the more severe symptoms had less BDNF. But the symptom severity, that correlation, wasn't as good. It's starting to fall apart. And so I wanted to know why. So having a look, I broke it out by trauma type. And if you have a look here, what we see is that these are the kind of the three characteristics by the different trauma type. And on the left, you see you have mature BDNF. And the math says that there's no real difference between the BDNF. But if we use our eyeball-metrically, we can see that our green military trauma is just a little bit higher. So my group that were the veterans had just a little bit more mature BDNF. And then if you look in the middle, this was the symptom severity based on the psychiatrist, on the doctor. And again, the math says that there's no difference, that they're all the same. But if you look eyeball-metrically, my military trauma was a little bit less. And that's the correlation, that if you have more mature BDNF, you have less severe symptoms. So those two go together quite well. But then if you look over on the right, you see our self-assessment score, our PCL5, our self-report. My childhood trauma and my other trauma group were about the same, and they matched the other two. But my military veterans actually self-reported their symptoms much lower. And so I don't think it'll come as a surprise to anyone that they're kind of in that military culture, you have to be tough. You can't, you can't have, symptoms. Yet I'm fine. Things are good. Don't worry about me. And that was my difference. And that was what was throwing out my correlation was that the self-report, they were saying they were much better than what the psychiatrist was saying and what my blood biomarker was saying. So this might be one instance where a biomarker can be helpful, where there's cultural reasons or even self-awareness reasons about why your self-report of your symptoms might not be the same as a professional doctor, and maybe an objective biomarker might be able to help. So is there a future for biomarkers in PTSD? I think BDNF holds promise, but there's still lots to do. If there was an easy answer, we'd have solved it by now. There's a lot of complexity, and our biology is really complex. But there's definitely keys, there's definitely hints, and there's definitely trends that tell us that we should be able to figure out some patterns, and that maybe this is just one of hopefully many biomarkers that'll help us bring that biology kind of into a mental health condition. So this is some of the work we've been doing at our National PTSD Research Centre. So Professor Dan showed you the picture of our center earlier. That'll be me on the top floor on the far left. So if you drive by Kiwana Way here on the Sunshine Coast, you can wave at me up at the window. I'll be up in the top corner. And then some of the work that I've said here, of course, is a huge team that's involved in our work. So I wanted to take a moment. If you want to read more about these studies, here's some more information as to where you can get the details. And as I said, you can always reach out to me with questions and ideas. And so that's my little snippet, my little blurb into my world of the biology. Well, I'll see if anybody wants to know more. This raised any questions and kind of what can we do? And so I think this is the point where we like to open it up and ask questions. And so I'll bring Professor Dan and Dr. Chrissy back in, and we'll see if we can answer some questions for people.
Hello, thank you. Wow, thanks very much, Bonnie. That was a fantastic masterclass. The questions have been absolutely streaming in, so I'm going to call on my colleagues to help get through these as many as we can. We've got another 7 minutes in the scheduled time, but we're also all happy to kick on a little bit longer if people are willing and able. Just some perhaps more pragmatic or questions about the course and there's a lot of questions about placements and topics and so on. I'll touch on some of those and might get Chrissy to help me as well. Bonnie, have a drink of water, and I've got some biomarker questions for you in a moment. So. There's questions about, Bachelor of Commerce as a background or a prerequisite qualification. If you have something like that, we're interested in knowing whether you have also any vocational experience, including volunteer experience in mental health sector. That would help with an application. Um, in terms of topics availability, there's been a whole range of questions. With the masters that Chrissy mentioned before, we do have capped placements at the moment, and for the research component, and they are supervised because of the numbers of supervisors available, and also that the topics are limited to data that is available already at the Thompson Institute. Because this is fully online, we're very much approaching this with in being very pragmatic in terms of having data available to people already. So the topics are somewhat limited, but in saying that, I think we've got a whole range of very interesting topics for people to choose from PTSD, of course, to molecular biology, to youth mental health, to healthy brain aging. There was even a question around whether people would have access to 7 Tesla functional MRI. So thanks for that question out there. We don't have 7 Tesla fMRI, but we do have a wonderful Skyra 3 Tesla MR. There is a possibility that one could have access to our functional magnetic resonance imaging data from that excellent scanner. Chrissy, there's a question about hours. How many hours are expected each week? I might throw that one over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So, as I said in our little chat, our modules are sort of designed to take a couple of hours. So, imagine you're watching a 2 hour lecture, but obviously it's in a very different format. But if you allocate about that much time to get to grips with the main kind of content for that week or that module, and then there's a bunch of kind of follow-up activities, like I said, which are designed to consolidate your learning and to lead towards your assessment tasks. Now, they're all optional. You don't have to do those. They're recommended because they do build your knowledge and build your skills for the assessment task, but they're optional. And then so the additional work is basically your own study time. You're reading, you're looking up in the literature and also working on your assessment tasks. So the uni roughly say about 10 hours per course per week, but because this is online, we do have students that approach it in very different ways. Some students just won't do a weekly amount, but they'll catch up on a couple of modules every other weekend or something like that. So it's really hard to say exactly, but it's also up to you how much you want to engage in the content and the extra resources that we have. But yeah, generally kind of a part-time load, which is 1 or 2 courses per semester, is advisable if you are working and if you have a family to look after, because it can get pretty busy juggling all of that. So I hope that answers it.
Thanks, Chrissy. So there's some questions around what I would say overlap and crossover with various programs, including beyond the Thompson Institute, but at UniSC. For example, MCP was mentioned. I believe that's Master of Clinical Psychology, and whether there is access through that to programs like reconsolidation therapy at the National PTSD Research Centre. Yes, there are ways that we could look at that. There's other questions around how PhDs relate to MHN. So that my answer to that one is that very much we see that our programs from grad cert, grad diploma, master of MHN, mental health and neuroscience, as being a pathway to higher degrees in research. So there are some more specific questions here around laboratory-based work in molecular biology. I think you got a lot of fans, Bonnie. And so the Master of MHN or even the graduate diploma of MHN would be a good prelude into a Master by Research or a PhD on site at the Thompson Institute if you're in or can be in Southeast Queensland. So that's a lot of the technical questions. We might come back to some of them if we've got time. I might take the opportunity to get some Bonnie questions because there's been a number. Bonnie, are you ready?
I'm ready. Go for it.
Okay, so the first one was about, I think a broader question. We'll warm you up with a broader question. Any biomarkers for prognostics? So that's for the to predict treatment response.
At the moment, there hasn't been as much work in that space because a lot of the biomarker space is quite new. We haven't got a lot of prognostic markers. There's been a lot of interest in inflammatory markers. We do know that we see a lot of low-level inflammation in PTSD. And so there have been theories that if we can address some of that inflammation, that can help with PTSD symptoms. And so that's an exciting area of work, and we're keeping an eye on that. But at the moment, unfortunately, across the board, there's no biomarker that's really been universally agreed on for diagnosis, for prognosis, for predicting treatment outcome, or even for monitoring treatment outcomes. So I think I've got a safe job. I've got lots of work to do. So if anyone's interested in joining me and coming helping me with the research, there's still lots to do.
So that's in the PTSD space, but what I can say is that in other areas, we have been looking at in the context of trials, for example, with ketamine, open label trials with ketamine, when we measure the brain in a number of ways, whether it's through MR scanning or EEG plus, cognitive measures, we're often looking at how these measures at baseline, that is before people undertake the treatment, whether we can then look back and find out whether they predict treatment response. And indeed, in other areas, we do have evidence for that. And there are many examples across the literature, and we do cover them in the programs. Bonnie, you'll like this question. Can one change their level, or can you change the level of people's mature BDNF? Are there any
Oh,
BDNF manipulations?
Oh yes, and this is an exciting area, and it's some of the work that we've got going. I didn't have a chance to share with you is that we actually are starting to understand a lot of the biology of how BDNF works and how we can influence it naturally. So we're one of the things that's a really easy way to influence your mature BDNF is exercise. So, you know, a lot of these old wives' tales, a lot of these anecdotes that we've always known, we now have been working out some of the science behind it. And so when we exercise and we use our muscles, when we actually use our muscles produce a myokine or a muscle hormone called irazine. And irazine, that indicates we've used our muscle, that we've done the exercise, and that molecule will actually go to our brain, and it can actually induce more expression of BDNF and some of that mature BDNF. So we talk about feeling better after exercise. We're starting to map that molecular pathway to say, yes, exercise can help you naturally increase your BDNF. So now we're trying to see exactly what type of exercise and how much exercise maximizes that effect. But that's just one example of one way you can increase your BDNF. Go for a run.
Thanks, Bonnie. The next two are interestingly very similar questions that seem to be from different people here, but very similar in their approach. And you might have already covered this, but maybe it's a chance to elaborate. So, questions around biomarkers that you've found to correlate with symptomatology. And the other related one is the question is there a correlation of BDNF that may be of use in the recovery from PTSD?
Yeah, those are great questions. And again, and that's something that we and many in the field are actively researching. So BDNF is looking to be one of those markers that does seem to correlate with those symptom severity. And we do find that how you measure it makes a difference. So in this particular presentation and for this time, I didn't get into all the details, but measuring it from our serum as opposed to our plasma and measuring it as either mature BDNF or total BDNF give us different results. And so for me as a very technical person, I think this is one of the reasons why we get some variation and there has been disagreement in the literature because as scientists, we all have a favorite way of measuring something and they're all a little bit technically different. So BDNF does appear to be one of these markers. And if we measure it the right way, it does seem to match with symptom severity. And we do see, particularly as Professor Dan was saying, that we've been looking at some of our clinical trials. And as people are recovering and as their PTSD symptoms decrease and diminish, we do see changes in that PTSD when BDNF is too high. And we do see it come down just that little bit to hopefully that just right range for individuals. So that's one that we've looked at in a lot of detail. But I fully expect there to be more. And as we get in and when we look at more biomarkers and more different conditions, I'm hoping we'll be able to find more examples that go together.
Um, BDNF is certainly a hot button topic right now. There's a lot of questions coming in, Bonnie. You might, if you don't answer them, I'm sure you'll be writing new papers about these questions. So two more very similar questions. So one is around any known relationship between BDNF and post-traumatic growth measures. And another related one is in regard to the study of BDNF, have you also considered the neurobiology of attachment? So, post-traumatic growth and attachment theories are intertwined with traumatic stress and PTSD theories. I know you've been reading widely on BDNF, Bonnie, but anything there?
Oh, see that's a fantastic area, and my hypothesis, if I was a betting scientist, I would put some money on that. That there would definitely be a relationship between BDNF and both kind of attachment and post-traumatic growth. But right now, the evidence we haven't gathered the evidence yet. There hasn't been enough studies and enough research, and that really positive side, that post-traumatic growth really hasn't had a lot of research and a lot of examination. So if some of you out there are looking to be students, that's a fantastic area I'd love to get into. And so more hands in the lab and more people through our clinical trials, and maybe I'll be able to answer that for you at the next masterclass. But the jury's still out.
Thanks, Bonnie. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, just some earlier questions, and thank you for those who asked them. And I'm sorry I didn't get to them till now, but I'm going to touch on four different questions, but there's a bit of a theme here. So one was about, do we cover psychoacoustics in the course? Another one was, do we look at intersectionality? That is, the intersection of mental health and neuroscience issues with, for example, marginalized populations or low income or First Nation people. Another question was about whether we cover neurodivergence, unique neurological circuitry, and whether people are at increased risk. And another one in a similar theme is, do we cover research around autism in women and how that relates to trauma? So what I would generally say about, I mean, many of those topics we do cover. Intersectionality is a good way for me to describe this. We actually encourage through our assessments for you to be intersectional in doing them. So this is not necessarily about rote learning the neuroanatomy of the brain, as I often say, but about applying mental health, or excuse me, or even neuroscience principles to mental health problems. And it's not always a neuroscience application. But we would encourage you to be intersectional. And there would be opportunity, even if we don't cover a very specific topic like psychoacoustics, there are probably ways you could address it in your assessments. Many of our assessments are what we call research ready, and we encourage people to write papers that are, and to address scientific communication in various ways. So the topic, sometimes you have a bit of room to move to choose one. And then it would be coming back to some of the principles that we cover in neuroscience and mental health to address them. Certainly, neurodivergence and neurocircuitry we do address. And absolutely, we do look at things like sex differences in the context of trauma. I'm going to throw over another question, very different one. Somebody's asked about knowing, where is this here? Um, the question is this: I'd love to hear a bit more about Dr. Quigley's, Dr. Chrissy and Dan's careers and how they chose to be in this specialization. Chrissy, maybe a quick one from you.
Oh, I was hoping you would go first, Dan. My story is a bit of a wiggly line, not a straight line, which I think it's interesting to point out. What I really like about all the people that I work with at the Thompson Institute, and really all the coordinators that you get across the MHN course, is that we've all come from lots of different backgrounds, with lots of different kind of areas of interest, but have all come together with this, one kind of passion and interest, which is, the neuroscience behind mental health. So I've got a human science, a psychology background. I also have a postgrad in neuroscience, and then, did my PhD looking at, I guess, the psychosocial, i.e. mental health aspects of physical injury. So I've kind of gone a bit of a wiggly way to where I am now. Whereas Dan's got a nice, super neuro from the start story. But yeah, so that's kind of how I've ended up where I am, and I'm part of the youth mental health team. So my main kind of research focus now is really looking at young people, mental health in young people, but particularly looking at brain development. I've got a bit of an interest in white matter, particularly, and also lifestyle factors and, things like green space and the environment. So that's where I'm at. That's what I do. And over to Dan.
Well, actually, I'm going to ask Bonnie. I mean, Bonnie, you touched on this before.
Yeah.
You said you're an outlier. I'm not sure I agree with that. Every good research institute covering mental health and neuroscience needs a molecular biologist, in my opinion. Tell us a little bit more about your background, Bonnie.
So thanks, Dan. That for me, so my background is actually a lot more medical science. I'm classically trained as a medical microbiologist and immunologist. So I had this grand goal. I thought what I was going to be when I grew up was an infectious disease researcher, and I've done a number of different projects from around the world. Depending on, I don't know if anyone's able to guess, my accent is Canadian. I'm originally Canadian, but I've had the absolute privilege to be able to work in Canada, in the US, in the UK, and now here in Australia, looking at at all kinds of different biological puzzles. And so bringing those genetic components and those, those immune and immunological components, and then the kind of that disease response. And to me, as kind of a more of a medical microbiologist and molecular biologist, it always surprised me that when you have the flu, nobody expects you to be happy and to feel well. So that when we have a mental condition and we're not happy, why do we think that there's nothing physically going on? And so that really struck me. And one of the reasons I really got into this field was to really kind of combat that stigma that if there's something going on in your head, there's something going on in your body, and it's all connected. And if I can bring that biological piece to the mental health and neuroscience space, I think that really adds a lot. So I've come from the medical side to then figure out our mental health. But then I said, how about Dan? Because he's got quite a career and is quite accomplished in his field.
Well, thanks, Bonnie. Yeah, my background is well, I started with a science degree. I majored in biology and psychology, and that I've always been a biological psychologist, I guess. And really, that's a variation of that title or those topics is mental health and neuroscience. I've applied my psychology training to be more specific around mental health and mental health conditions, mental health problems. And the biology is, of course, the neurobiology. So I've always been coming back to intersections. I've always been fascinated by the intersection between the way that we think and then what we measure, particularly in the brain. And for us, we believe that brain health is equals mental health, and there's a strong relationship between the two. And those themes come across throughout our mental health and neuroscience programs. And I'm sure you could see that in the masterclass so wonderfully done today by Bonnie. I think we should wrap things up at this point. I would like to thank everybody for attending this webinar. We've had over 250 people involved in this webinar, and I know many others registered, and you'll be hopefully listening to this recording at a later stage. But thank you all for your interest and especially for the questions. I'm sorry we didn't get through all of them, but we got through as many as we could, and you got to hear a lot more about BDNF and then also a little bit more about our own backstories. It's a pleasure to cover these topics with you all. And I would like to thank the team. So firstly, Chrissy for an amazing overview of the programs once again. Bonnie, a fantastic webinar. And behind the scenes, we've got Phil, Chris, and Trish, UniSC Marketing and Comms team. They've helped us pull all this together as usual. Thank you very much for your support. We'll be sending out a follow-up email um, with the webinar recording and a taster module. So if you have any other questions, please get in touch with us. On that note, thank you again, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.